All right, we should be live now. Gonna give people a few minutes to trickle in, but if you are here, let me hear you sound off in the chat. I'll get it started. Once this gets started up properly, I'm not going to be able to see or hear anything on the chat. Not for a little bit. Why am I still hearing stuff? That should not be happening. Oh, I have a YouTube video open somewhere. That was confusing. There we go. I was like, why can I hear myself? That shouldn't be happening. I'm still hearing myself. How many YouTube videos do I have of me open? There we go. Hopefully that's the last one. That's kind of a problem if I'm hearing myself multiple times. All right, I'm going to go just a few minutes, just hanging out, and let people trickle in before I get started on the actual whole lecture part of this thing. This should be fun. And if it turns out nobody shows up, I'll just make up a mystery on my own. But it's a lot more fun when people are doing it. So we'll see what happens. By the way, if nobody's seen, the Kickstarter made goal. So we are in pretty good shape. We're still taking people. If you want to go ahead and get yourself a graphic novel over at www.lotd-comic.com. This book is The Legacy of L, my second mystery graphic novel, follow up on the first one, The Letters of the Devil. The basic concept is that the case that happened in the first one is kind of got a reputation. It's now gone down in infamy, and a lot of people take the case in different ways. Melina Quinn, who's the protagonist, is a college student studying criminology, and she's writing her senior thesis on the original case. Everything changes a little bit when she finds out that a friend of hers had committed suicide right after receiving an email that appears to come from the series' antagonist, L. A lot of twists and turns. This one goes a lot crazier than the first book, in a good way. And so if you're interested in that, the website's down at the bottom, www.lotd-comic.com. And a big part of what I'm going to be showing you guys is how I put this together. And we're going to hopefully be able to work together and make that happen. I've given this talk a few times as a panel at cons. I've done it at OhioCon and I've done it at MatsuryCon. Been fine-tuning it, and I'm excited to be bringing the latest version of it. I actually just got to add some stuff to it because of a book I read recently that had some really good expression work, which is one of the things I talk about. So that'll be pretty exciting. All right, I'm going to give it about one more minute, and then we're going to start jumping into the proper thing. That should be enough time for people to come in. And again, if you're here on YouTube, go ahead and let me hear you. Go ahead and post in chat just so I know you're there. I've done these streams talking to the void, and I can do it again, but it's always nice to know that, someone's there celebrating with me because my Kickstarter is funded and I have no stress anymore. By the way, if you're going to do a Kickstarter, try to get it funded sooner rather than later, because waiting to get funded to the last day, it's a really long month. Very long month. I do not recommend it. Although it seems to have worked out, which is good. But yeah, I am a very tired boy. All right, what time are we looking at? I've waited about 5 minutes. I don't want to wait too long. People can jump in on the lecture. That's not going to be a big deal. And part of this is I wanted to get it recorded for when I do this panel in the future. So let's go ahead and start the process. Oh, that camera's frozen. That's not a good look. Try that. That should be better. Yep, I'm moving now. And by the way, I will not be able to see the chat for just a little bit, but yeah, go ahead and get the shout outs out there just so when we switch back, I will know. All right, let's get started properly. Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Wright Human, cartoonist extraordinaire, and welcome to WHODRAWNIT, Mysteries and the Comic Media. Now, I've given this lecture at as a number of panels at different anime conventions, and in honor of my Kickstarter, which is finally ending, it's ending at 10 p.m. tonight, so in about 2 hours from now, at the link at the bottom of the screen, www.LOTD-comic.com. And yeah, it's been a long time coming. It's finally ending, and in honor of that, I've decided to show you guys how I make mystery comics. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So before we get rolling, let's start with the most important question. Who the hell is this dweebus, and why should we listen to him? Well, to start with, I told you a minute ago, you guys should listen better. But for real, I am a freelance cartoonist, illustrator, and part-time Lyft driver out of the Columbus area. I am a graduate of the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont and have a Master's of Fine Arts degree in sequential art, which means I have an actual graduate degree in comics. Here's my diploma. I have a running comedy weeb comic about convention life called Cost Pain. I am a frequent artist alley vendor. I'm a Virgo and like long walks on the beach, and I love mystery comics. In fact, I love them so much that I've made two. In 2017, I launched my first webcomic project, which was $25, $75 for the super fancy special editions. Letters was my first mystery. The sequel's done and is currently being kickstarted until 10 p.m. tonight at the link at the bottom of the screen. More shilling on that later. During the process of making these graphic novels, I learned a lot about how to make a mystery comic, which is why I've decided to take the time to talk a bit about it. Before we get rolling on process, let's talk about another elephant in the room. Who cares about mystery comics? Besides, me. But your point is well taken. To start with, let's talk about what makes a real mystery comic. To be clear, I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper. And just because I say something isn't a real mystery comic doesn't mean that it doesn't have mystery elements, or even that it's bad. I enjoy my share of Batman comics, but mostly as a Batman fan, not as a mystery fan, despite, the name of the series. I hate to say it, but most Batman comics are not mysteries. He's not really solving anything, and what he's solving usually doesn't work very well. I like mysteries that leave a series of breadcrumbs that the reader can follow, that send you after red herrings and into complex schemes, puzzles that get wrapped up into a nice little bow at the end and leave the reader satisfied. Unfortunately, this is not how most Western comics do things, especially with superhero comics, which have a tendency to keep things pretty simple. And I mean, I get it. You're writing on spec and cranking out an issue a month that should theoretically become a cohesive story while a team of editors constantly micromanages you. Not ideal working environments. In most cases, you end up with something that's too simple, impossible for the reader to solve themselves, or just a mess to read. And as a result, we don't really see mystery seriously explored much over here. This is not to say that there are no good mystery comics out of the West. There are just fewer than you would expect. If you like superhero comics and want an easy intro, check out Identity Crisis by Brad Meltzer and Rags Morales. It's got some serious flaws, but as a mystery, it's reasonably solid. If you're more into indie comics, I strongly recommend the Kill My Mother trilogy by Jules Feiffer, particularly the first book, and My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris. There's another more recent discovery of mine that I wanted to share. You may be familiar with Origins Game Fair. Well, I went there this past year and I met some people from Van Ryder Games who are making graphic novel adventures. It's basically an evolution of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and they are incredible. I'm currently working through Sherlock Holmes 4 investigations whenever I have free time, which is never, and it's one of the best comic mystery experiences I've ever had. Be sure to look these guys up, they're doing great things. So like I said, there are examples of Western mystery comics, but they're an extremely small segment of the comic market. Now this is a weird trend. It's not the case in other media. Mystery novels have remained popular for decades. I bet everyone in this stream can name some authors without even thinking too hard. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie. I personally love Louise Penny and Tana French. In fact, according to a survey by Statista in 2015, 47% of the people in their sample of over 2,200 Americans had read a mystery book in the last year. Not a big book reader? How about television? You've got police procedurals like all the Law & Order, CSI, NCIS, detective dramas like Monk, Psych, Columbo, Elementary, which is way better than Sherlock, you can fight me. Speaking of Sherlock, though, if you leave American television and go to England, there's Poirot, Midsummer Murders, Father Brown, and then there's my personal guilty pleasure. We'll get to that one later. So there's a market in the West for the mystery genre. There are also a lot of comic readers, but there aren't a lot of mystery comics. So you may be thinking, maybe comics just don't work as mysteries, right? Wrong. And you know how I know? Besides, the obvious. Because of something very near and dear to many of the people I've shown this panel to at anime cons. Manga! That's right. The Japanese love their mystery comics. By any chance, have you read Detective Conan, Case Closed? That series has run so long, you'd think Akira Toriyama drew it. How about 20th Century Boys? Detective Loki? The Ace Attorney Investigations manga? Even a weird one I found recently, where Sherlock Holmes gets reincarnated as a puppy. But for my money, the best of the best, the one that proves beyond a doubt that mystery and comics go together like fangirls and fan fiction, is this. The Kindaichi Case Files. Huh? You've never heard of it? Well, I don't blame you. It hasn't been in print for a while now, and it is hard to find copies of it. But for my money, it is the single best mystery comic series ever written. If you're interested, check the dealer's rooms at a con. Sometimes they have, the vendors have it. And if they have a copy I don't have, and I am at that con, I will buy it from you or trade it for one of my books. The Kindaichi Case Files are amateur detective whodunits. They all follow the same basic path. Kindaichi, a high schooler and brilliant detective, like you do, ends up stranded someplace with a bunch of strangers with no way out. Suddenly, people start dying. No, Kindaichi isn't a serial killer. He's just a brilliant goofball who outwits the criminal and the rival detective to solve the case. It's formulaic, but it's a really strong formula. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't also note that a Kindaichi anime was released in the last year or so. I've heard it's good, but I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Making a graphic novel takes up a lot of time and brain power, you guys. It's on my list, though. Now, a warning before we go on. I am about to spoil one of the books. It is important for explaining why comics work well for mysteries, otherwise I'd never do it. Please also note that Kindaichi is a horn dog, and there will be some clothing tearing, as well as a brief shot of Kindaichi's butt. Some of what happens can also be read as anti-LGBT. This series was written in the 90s and is not exactly PC by modern standards. Now, ordinarily, if I'm giving this talk at a panel, I do give people the option to ask me to skip this. I am not doing that here because I can't really see you guys, but if the stuff I just said is unappealing to you, feel free to mute it or navigate away. In about 5 minutes, we'll be completely through that section. You should be fine. All right. Without further ado, let's move forward. So here's the moment I realized just how good comics could be at mystery storytelling. There's been this big point in Treasure Isle that the people dying off wronged this genius little boy many years ago. Guess who's trapped with them on the island while they're dying off? A genius little boy! Coincidence? Well, yes, kind of. He's a red herring. That's how they do. The whole time, Kindaichi has been flirting with a young woman that lives and works at the place they're trapped. And there's one scene where, oops, she comes out of the bathroom while Kindaichi is changing. Oh, how zany! Now I want everyone to look at this panel. This panel holds one of the last clues that Kindaichi needs to solve the case. Can you see it? That's right. His lovely young love interest just used the bathroom, and yet the toilet seat is up. Guess who's not really a young lady, but secretly a genius little boy? I do feel obligated to bring up at this point that this character is not trans. He is a cis male who is able to pass as a woman to throw suspicion off of himself. Uh, Once again, though, I do reiterate, I love the series, but it really is not PC. But I'm getting off track. Look at this panel. How perfect is that? It's not obvious or jumping off the page or being forced into your face. It's just there. This is the best possible way a clue could be hidden, in plain sight without just giving everything away. I love, love, love this. And when you think about something like this in film, with time compression and things moving the way that they have to in film, just constantly moving forward, moments like that get made so obvious. They just are forced to jump out at you because that's the only way they can get a clue across. In comics, you can hide it like this. Now, while we're talking about subtlety, I want to talk about one of the main drawing things that we're going to talk about. Most of this talk is going to be about writing, because with mysteries, that's the most important part. But this is also about comics, so I'm going to get into another place where comic art can really help. Expressions. Now, if you're not familiar with the show Lie to Me, it's about a micro-expression expert who can read the tiniest twitches that people make to figure out what they're really feeling. It's a lot of fun, but it did sometimes get really goofy. They made it work, but it can be really tough, especially on a TV show, to always get actors who can pull off the level of subtlety necessary to fake micro-expressions. We're talking flashing an emotion in a fraction of a second while burying it among other emotions. It's not easy, although the cast does a commendable job of it. The problem here is time. In film, it tends to move at a pretty fixed clip. That means that anything that needs to be conveyed extremely quickly often ends up exaggerated, just like clues I was talking about. In comics, speed isn't fixed. It's controlled by the reader. This is a moment from Junji Ito's adaptation of No Longer Human. Now, without knowing the context of the scene, we can infer a lot. You may even be able to correctly guess what's happening just by watching her expression change. In a movie, this would all happen in a couple seconds. But you've been studying these expressions the entire time I've been talking. For reference, the man she's been seeing just came by with his fiancée and announced he was getting married. When you're the one drawing the faces, you have a great deal of control over the expressions, and you can craft them to be as subtle or complex as you want without relying on another person to attempt to replicate it themselves. Don't get me wrong, collaboration is a good thing, but if you want to get something exactly right, it's really nice to be able to do it yourself. But wait, I hear you say, I don't know enough about people's expressions to draw them well. Are you sure about that? I'm sure many people watching the stream will recognize this game, but I don't know how many people remember how groundbreaking it was. L.A. Noire boasted cutting-edge, for the time, facial capture technology that was perfect for a mystery game. There's a particular section in the manual, yes, it's so old it had a decent manual, talking about how to tell that a suspect was lying, and it included the following tip. Above all, trust your instinct. The human face has hundreds of muscles that can all betray a person's true feelings, and you have many years of practice at reading these subconscious signals. I remember being absolutely floored by this advice, but you know what? It's accurate. By virtue of being a human being, you know how to read body language better than you may think. And whoever consumes your content, they also have those skills. You want to give them the chance to use them. The trick for a cartoonist is to move from understanding it unconsciously to understanding it consciously. And for that, we move to Scott MacLeod. Now, hopefully, everyone seeing this has at least heard this name. For those of you who don't know, though, Scott MacLeod was one of the first cartoonists to write comic education books in a comic book format. These 3 books are pretty much mandatory reading for anyone interested in getting into the field. And yes, I'm including Reinventing Comics, which even MacLeod considers the black sheep of the family because it includes a lot of predictions that never actually happened, but still has a lot of interesting stuff. For the purposes of this talk, however, we'll be focusing on his third book, Making Comics. In this book, MacLeod goes into detail about creating expressions. He says that all human expressions can be treated as a combination of 6 core expressions at different intensities. He goes on to break down which muscles in the face are implemented for each emotion. Using this simple system, a very wide range of very believable emotions can be created, just like mixing paint. Full disclosure, I do know some cartoonists who aren't fond of MacLeod's style. They feel his expressions look too mechanical, and in a way, they are very mechanical, but only because your face is, well, a machine. It has a system of muscles and tendons that lift and contract, and understanding how they work in conjunction with different expressions is an incredible tool in your arsenal. It's kind of like how an artist will sometimes draw the skeleton before drawing the full body to make sure a particular pose is done correctly. I won't go into too much depth with this talk, as he goes into further detail about important things like which muscle groups we use for each expression, what it looks like when people fake or conceal an emotion, etc., etc. If you're planning on tackling the art side of mystery comics, or any type of comic for that matter, you owe it to yourself to read Making Comics. Now you've heard my arguments for mystery comics and some basics on the art of mystery comics. Now we get into the real meat. How to write them. One of the first things most creators will tell you is that you can't create in a vacuum. You've got to be familiar with the subject you're working on, and that means consuming mystery media. I've mentioned some books, shows, and manga that can help with that, and the handouts I've provided have those and more. But there's one show that really helped me understand and break down the genre. Remember that guilty pleasure show I mentioned before? Well, here's my confession. My deep, secret, shameful love of Murder, She Wrote. Now, before I lose all street cred, this show sucks. I love it, but it sucks. The characters are ridiculous, the writing is hackneyed, and it hasn't aged well. But it was really easy to watch in the background while working, and I discovered that after a few seasons, I knew exactly what was going to happen in every episode. 10, 15 minutes in, I'd be like, oh, that's the guy that's going to die. That's the guy that's going to get accused because he's a dick. But he didn't do it. That little quiet lady in the corner did it. It is the purest, most blatant example of the formula in action. This brings me to another point. Yes, mystery follows formulas. Technically, all art follows formulas of one type or another, but mystery even more so than some. There are patterns closely followed by cozies, police procedurals, whodunits, amateur detectives, you name it. And a big part of learning to write in a new genre is learning how the formulas work, which is why this show was so helpful to me, because even a bad mystery can teach you about writing mysteries. The show is currently available on Amazon Prime. Don't have that. Or the complete box set. Well, Netflix has a few shows that can help similarly. I did mention them briefly before, but these are the 3 I recommend most highly. Father Brown, which is similarly formulaic, but pretty good. Poirot, which contains many very good adaptations of the original Agatha Christie mysteries. And Midsummer Murders, which will give you hours of police procedural mystery exposure. You may notice that all of these are BBC shows. Well, what can I say? The BBC does really good mysteries. Anyway, the most important thing you'll learn from these shows is that the best mysteries are based around relationships. Who knows who wants what from somebody else, who has secrets they're desperate to keep, etc., etc. To that end, there's something that may be a little closer to the little nerd hearts of people who'd be interested in a talk about mystery comics. A game. So, perhaps you've heard of Fiasco. If you haven't, Fiasco is a role-playing game where you sit around a table with a group of friends and, over the course of a few hours, tell a Coen Brothers-esque story about kooky people trying to get what they want and how it all goes terribly, terribly wrong. It's a great game, although I've discovered that you have to warn people about one thing ahead of time. When I say role-playing, I mean acting. You don't have to be good at acting. Hell, I suck at it. But you have to be comfortable doing it, and a lot of people I've played with aren't. It's a great exercise for writers, though, and there are a few elements to their rules that I've applied in writing my own mysteries. Some of those elements are: everyone has relationships, everyone has flaws, everyone wants something, and not everyone gets what they want. Keep these in mind as we go forward. So while I was at the Center for Cartoon Studies, I got a chance to talk to Sarah Stewart Taylor, a writer of both cozy mysteries and YA. I told her about an exercise I had devised, where I'd come up with two people, decide that one killed the other, then devise how and why. She gave me some very interesting advice in this regard. Don't start with the crime. Start with the characters and the relationships. The crime will follow. Using this principle, the aforementioned game and fiasco rules, I cobbled together a system that I like to call the Web of Mystery. What is a web of mystery, you ask? It's my conglomeration of several other storytelling and brainstorming exercises, most notably the fiasco system I mentioned before. This is how I came up with both of my mysteries, as you can see here. The one on the left is for my first book, and the one on the right is for my second. Please forgive the photo quality of that one, since all I could find were really bad neon markers. None of this makes sense, right? Of course not. I work with shorthands for faster working, and so I don't spoil any passersby who happen to see my whiteboard. But that's okay, because today we're going to do a brand new one together. Let's see if I can switch this over correctly. Oh, right, I have to do it this way. That's looking good, and now a little thing popping up. Oh, hi, Rainer. See you in the chat there. Cool. All right. So here's how this is going to work. Normally, when I'm doing this at a con, we're doing this by having people yell out suggestions and things like that. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat, which, as you can see, is now up on the screen. And we are going to use that in order to figure out how to put together this mystery. Now, to start with, when I do this at a con, I'm usually using an anime convention as the location. I've thought about it, and the reason I'm not going to do that is I can't guarantee that everyone who looks at this screen has been to an anime con, or is honestly that familiar with them. I've decided, in honor of the book that I'm finishing up now, that I should use that basic location for this particular circle, because I think people, even if people haven't been to this place, they're familiar with it in different ways. So we are going to be doing our mystery. That text is going to need to be larger, isn't it? At Lorem Ipsum. No. There we go. At a college campus. I wrote campus. Let's increase the size. We need to be at 24. That'll be perfect. The chat is updating really slow. I said howdy like a minute before it appeared. Yeah, that sounds about right. But we are going to make this work. I can be patient. And in the meantime, before anything else, I need to stop my phone from making noise because I was not a smart streamer and forgot to turn that off. All right. So here's how this is going to work. Very first thing we're going to do is come up with 6 characters. It doesn't have to be 6, but for demos, it makes it a little bit easier just to come up with a round number. You could do more, you could do less, and I usually do 6 for these demos. Another important thing, we are not doing specific people. For example, if I were on this campus, you wouldn't put down as a character Ben Wright, human cartoonist extraordinaire. But you could put down, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this one as a free one, undergrad. So a single undergrad student. We can figure out who they are during the process of this. And I'm also going to put down an additional rule. That is the only person who's going to be defined by being a student. So we have to come up with 6 other types of people you would run into on a college campus. Now, as far as I can tell, there was one person in the chat. We can work with that. Go ahead and start coming up with people, posting them. I know there's going to be a delay, but as soon as I start seeing names come up, we will start putting stuff in there. As a secondary example, just because it's pretty easy, and just to get it started while I wait for the chat to update, we're going to have a professor. So 2 of them are taken care of. Let's start seeing the suggestions. 2. Sorry, Rainer, don't know what that means. Actually, wait, I can look at the live chat. Janitor, that's a good one. There we go. I'm glad you're one of the people in the chat. You're an actual comic creator. This will hopefully be useful to you and not just a random looky-loo. All right, I came up with 2. Think you can hit me with one more? Principal. All right. I looked at the live chat, so we'd be able to do that. That actually seems to be updating pretty well. That's interesting. Thought it was bad. Ah, what are you doing? Using text in Photoshop is not fun. Actually, if it's a college, it's usually the president of the college. All right, start thinking about one more. I will fill out one of the 3. And if anyone's in there besides Rainer, go ahead. Feel free to post. We can update this. Let's see. Undergrad, professor, janitor, president, school librarian. You've been thinking about making mysteries. Yep. Well, this will show you a very quick, surprisingly easy way to structure a basic mystery. All right, Rainer, see if you can hit me with the last one. It occurs to me this probably is not incredibly fair, since I happen to know that your only college experience was CCS, which was not a typical college. But you could figure something out. Maybe I should have done an anime con. You know those. Someone who was hanging out at parties after graduating. That's a great one. Super senior is what I'll do. Okay. Next up, things get a little bit crazy, because we are going to do 2 steps kind of simultaneously. We're going to figure out every single person's secret and every single person's relationships. Now, I've kind of in the past written this as one happening before the other, things like that. They kind of happen simultaneously because a lot of times the secret informs the relationship or vice versa. Just as an example, what would be a good one to start with? Let's start with the professor just as a sample. Fixing grades. The professor, for whatever reason, is not grading fairly. Now, here's a question. Who is that professor going to be interacting with? Who might actually know their secret? Arguably, a few of them could. It doesn't make sense for the super senior, because Super Senior's graduated. What does he care? Don't think it makes sense for the president because the president could just fire the professor. The one that probably makes the most sense, I'm going to switch to pencil tool, would be the undergrad, who's probably getting their grades fixed somehow. Oh, janitor? Oh, killed someone by accident and janitor. Were you suggesting killed someone by accident for the professor? Because we can do that. It is a pain that it takes a while for the chat to update. Rainer, thank you for texting me, but let's keep the chat in here because we'll have a record of it for future playbacks. Actually, you know what? If you want to go ahead and text me the stuff, it'll probably just make it faster, but also just post it there. I know it's just a secret. Why don't we put... I do like the idea of having killed someone before. And you mentioned the janitor afterwards, so I'm just going to say that's what we're working with. Actually, it probably makes more sense. I kind of like the idea that someone else did it and the janitor helped hide it, and that can be the relationship and that can be the secret. Why don't we say the librarian killed someone by accident? And the janitor's relationship is... I did that to the wrong spot. There we go. The janitor's relationship is helped librarian hide body. Now, this is going to be a death separate from the main mystery. So that's one of the things that's going to be important. So let's see. Oh, and we did have this connection that I ended up erasing. The undergrad, if they're getting their grades fixed, is probably blackmailing the professor. That can be their main secret. All right. So Super Senior, I imagine the Super Senior interacts a lot with the student. By the way, something else I forgot to mention, and this is one of the other important things. You're going to want most people to have at least 2 relationships. Not all of them have to, but the number of relationships is actually going to factor in later when we're figuring out who did what. I'm going to go ahead and say these 2 know each other. Maybe they used to date, or something along those lines. Or maybe they hooked up once at one of the random parties the Super Senior was showing up at. So that gets us started. Let's see. The president currently doesn't have any secrets. What should the president's secret be? Who would the president be connected to? Technically, the president could be connected to everybody. I've got a fun one. The undergrad has gone to the president already about what the professor's doing. So they've already made contact about that. The undergrad is starting to have a lot of relationships, and this is going to be important in just a minute. An affair. Affairs are always good. Let's see, who could have had an affair? Let's see. Got the super senior, the janitor, the librarian. Janitor and librarian need to be connected to everybody else because currently they're floating on their own. I'm going to go ahead and make an executive decision. Librarian having an affair with the professor. That already has some complicated stuff in there. Maybe that's why the student is actually blackmailing. Ah, maybe the professor with the librarian. It's funny, I'm getting your texts at the same time. I thought about that with the president. You know what? I'm going to do a little switching around. We're going to move killed someone by accident to the president. Had the janitor cover it up. The librarian's secret is having the affair. I'm going to change this to helped president hide body. We still don't have a secret for the super senior. I'm going to connect the super senior to the janitor and do always a fun one to throw in there. Drug dealer uses janitor's closet for stash. All right, this is a pretty simple one so far, but we've got a lot of information. Based on what I'm seeing, we currently have two characters who have three relationships. We have the undergrad, and we have the Wait, did I see that wrong? Oh, we only have one character with three. Nope, janitor also has three. Super senior affair with librarian. We could do that. All right, this one is a little tricky just because we have multiple people with the same maximum number of relationships. Oh, we have someone else in the chat. I just noticed that didn't come from Rainer. Welcome. All right. If anyone has suggestions for how to adjust this, we can. Otherwise, I'm going to start building this into an actual mystery. And chat is a little bit slow, so I'm going to wait for just a minute, let you guys catch up. So far, what we've come up with, the undergrad is blackmailing the professor, who is fixing grades and is also having an affair with a librarian. I just realized that as it currently stands, the janitor and the librarian don't need a relationship, so we can change that. The president of the college accidentally killed somebody. The janitor helped the president hide the body. The president is also, the janitor has also worked with a super senior who is a drug dealer, has used the janitor's closet for a stash. Wow, I didn't realize lag was that bad. Okay, good to know. But we've got, with one change, and we've got two people now who have three relationships, and right now that's the current maximum. Here is what I'm thinking. There are two basic categories for mysteries here. We've got uh, whodunits and we've got detective mysteries. Detective is a little bit more the cozies, police procedurals. A lot of those will work that way. Very often, the detective is not one of these characters. They're an outside force. However, usually the person who has the most relationships is the person who dies. And very often, the person with the fewest relationships is the person who did it. That's the most common way to look at it if you break these down. Now, we've got two that are the same, so it's time to just get creative and think about it. Uh, I think it's more interesting if the undergrad is the one who dies, based on what I'm currently seeing. What that would mean is the undergrad is, I'm going to use the mouse. You should be able to see this, right? Cool. So the undergrad is blackmailing the professor to get grades fixed. The undergrad, at some point, I'm going to say the professor probably stopped dealing with that. So the undergrad went to the president about it. That's what that relationship is there. Now, the librarian is having an affair with the professor. That makes the librarian an interesting potential for the person who did it. I also think that there's a decent red herring path here because the super senior, who's got a bunch of shady dealings, maybe he's a dealer for both the librarian and the undergrad, or maybe he's been in a relationship with them. I don't know why I'm automatically assigning gender here, but I'm kind of just freeballing. Uh, which also makes the janitor look guilty because, in addition to the janitor helping with a stash, the janitor has previously helped hide a body that died in an accident that is unrelated to the main mystery. And just me spitballing this out loud, we put this together in 10 to 15 minutes. We have a basic mystery here. And obviously, there will be things that change and you can upgrade it and do other things, but it works incredibly fast. Oh, interesting. Fewest did it. I hadn't thought of that, but it does build tension. Yeah, the nice thing about it is the people who have the most relationships very often look guilty if they've survived. Uh, it's most often the person you least suspect, but has the strongest motive to do it, and you just don't realize it. That's why it's often the person with the fewest relationships is the one you're going to overlook. The others make great red herrings. And I want to point out, we started all this. We didn't even know who all the characters were until we laid them out. We didn't know their relationships until after that. We didn't even know who died or if that's the crime that we'd end up with. And just spitballing, we came up with this pretty quickly. Now, there's another part. We get to apply it. Bring this sucker back up. Actually, I'd need to switch it so I'm hiding chat as well. Ah, too many screens. There we go. There we go. Bye, guys. I'll see you again at the end of this. All right. I imagine many people who have done any kind of storytelling stuff have seen this. Most people who write stories come across some variation of this diagram at some point. The hero's journey represents the arc of a story, and it is useful to keep in mind, although I find it a little stuffy. You'd be surprised how many books and movies follow this formula almost exactly. Now, there are a lot of weird terms up here, and to be honest, I'm not a fan of a lot of them. If you want to learn more about the wheel itself, just about any storytelling class or book will give you the basics. For the sake of this panel, however, I have created an alternate version. The Detective's Journey, a simplified version with fewer steps and a more specialized naming system. All right, I'm going to try to do something a little bit fancy here. There we go. Ah, behave. Thank you. All right, it's going to be finicky, so I am going to do this a little bit differently. All right, we'll just have to remember the wheel because it's going to be a pain. I will have it up on my screen to be able to talk about it. Actually, wait, can I? No, I won't be able to. I messed with this before and it didn't do it. Okay, so let's start off. Step 1, the setup. Basically, we begin by setting up the world in stasis. Who are the people? What did they do? Where are they? Etc., etc. That's basically what we just did. These steps will lead up to the hook. Very often, the hook is the crime being investigated, but it doesn't have to be. In my book, for example, the hook is the receipt of an anonymous letter. This letter starts the action and gets the events rolling. In the case of what we put together, the hook would probably be the death of the undergrad. Now I've combined a couple steps here because they really amount to one thing. Step 3, the detective gets involved. We're going to work on this one as a just straightforward, cozy detective novel, which means that we're going to have an outside detective. It's not going to be one of the people there. We could do that. It'll take a little bit more thought. But this step comprises whatever it takes to get the detective to investigate the hook. In this case, cops are probably called. Simple as that. At which point, step 4, the game is afoot. The detective has taken the plunge and is committed to investigating the case. In film terms, this is the end of Act 1. So let's talk about Act 1 for a second. I went through that pretty quickly, but this is, in reality, the most important part of the mystery. Everything we just did with that web of mystery was set up for that first act. The detective's first job is to figure out what happened in this stage, who the players are, how they're involved and connected, what they did, and why they did it. A little later, we'll work through developing this section more, but keep in mind how important it is. Now, for step 5, which is basically the core investigation. The entire special world is the investigation, really, but the core legwork happens in this stage. You'll be juggling a lot of plot lines at this point, but here's my main recommendation. Figure out what the investigator is doing, then figure out what everyone else is doing while that happens. The characters aren't all just going to stand still while the investigator does all the action. Things can happen in the background. Maybe characters hang out. Maybe evidence is hidden. Maybe they go about their day-to-day lives as normal. For example, maybe the president meets up with the janitor to discuss not mentioning the body. Or maybe the librarian and the professor meet up to continue their affair. There's a lot of different things that could happen. Maybe the super senior shows up and is talking to people in kind of an innuendo-esque way. Maybe they seem to suspect something. Anyway, things will mostly keep on keeping on until step 6, the twist. That's when something goes very, very wrong. Maybe one of the red herrings is actively accused / arrested / murdered. This could be, in our example, maybe the principal gets arrested because of the truth about the hidden body is discovered. Or maybe the janitor does, and then there's a question of whether or not to take the fall. Maybe someone suspects the super senior of being about to out something, and the super senior gets killed. There's a lot that could happen. Other examples, though. Character becomes a victim. The detective could be viciously assaulted. The detective discovers their prime suspect was a red herring. Whatever the incident, it is the low point of the story, but it provides the detective with a vital clue. That's step 7. As an example, let's say the detective had been suspecting the super senior. The super senior dies. That's a tragedy because there's another victim, but all of a sudden, the super senior is no longer the chief suspect, and they know that someone else must be. Now, stuff may be going wrong, but the detective is now closer than ever to solving the case. That vital clue will lead them to the eureka moment, step 8, which is the end of the investigation, Act 2, and the beginning of the wrap-up, Act 3. At this point, the detective has solved the case. We'll say it was the librarian. All that's left is reveal the answer to the reader. That brings us to step 9, the parlor room. Now keep in mind, that's a colloquial term. You don't have to gather all the principal characters in the same room and point by point explain everything to them. What's important is that the reader understands what happened. You're explaining it to them. So as long as that happens, you can pass on the information however works. Finally, step 10 is the wrap up. The detective does what they're going to do with the information, the consequences are faced, and the world returns to a semblance of normalcy. So, with that, that's the whole basic talk. I promised a little shilling at the end, and I am nothing if not honest. So, my second book, The Letters of the Devil 2, The Legacy of L, is basically done. In fact, the Kickstarter for it is running until 10 p.m. tonight, so basically about an hour from now. It's a continuation of the first book's story, but with things getting bigger, crazier, and opening a world of possibilities for future books. If you're interested in participating in the Kickstarter, then the best way to do that is just go to the website that's on the screen at the top, www.lotd-comic.com. Again, that Kickstarter ends in about an hour, so this is your last chance to do anything with it. If you want to check out some of my other work, you can actually read the first book by going to bwhcomics.com/LOTD. There's also a prologue there for the second book. I also have a Patreon at www.patreon.com/BWHComics and a running weeb comic, a comedy comic about cosplay and convention craziness called Cospain at www.cospaincomic.com. You can also follow me as BWH Comics on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. So that is the whole spiel. And from there, we just go and chat for a bit. Let me switch over to the fun view. There we go. And my camera's frozen again. I don't know why it's freezing. There we go. I am back. It does have to be a literal parlor room. I'm sorry, I'm only now getting to see some of that chat. Yep. Literal parlor room, like, that's honestly one of the easiest ways to do it. Just gather everybody together, explain everything. I haven't done that yet. Both my mysteries have been, there's been a one-on-one with the protagonist and the antagonist. Uh, First freeze this chat. Yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason when I've been switching modes this time, it's been freezing the camera. So I knew to be ready for it. But yeah, the using the parlor room is it works really well, but I've been doing one-on-ones with the protagonist and antagonist and not explaining it to any of the other people involved. Um, and that works because they're kind of hashing everything out and the audience gets to know what's what. So, a couple other tips that I don't normally put in the talk, but it's useful information. Uh, you, as the creator, have a lot of control over what information is there and what clues are there. I like to think that the goal is for people to find 90% of the clues. They don't need to find them all. You can put stuff in there that is a hint that you see as a hint that nobody else sees as a hint. It can be so subtle that no one picks up on it. But you do want to have at least 90% be stuff that people are going to catch. There are simple little things like tiny bits of body language that no one's going to notice. So you mentioned 20th Century Boys. Any thoughts with fantastical elements like robots while having it mystery solvable? Technically, having supernatural stuff or robots does violate the golden rules of classic detective stories, but a lot of good stuff violates those rules. So I think it's something you can pull off. I recommend it only. It seems like Victorian era is very useful for not reading high tech. That's true. But high tech is not a problem as long as the rules are established. That's the big thing. Um, you have the big problem is when magic is used as a blanket catch-all without it explaining anything else. Like actually the Dresden Files are a decent example of this because that's all about a wizard who is a detective, but they explain the rules of magic. So if you follow the logic that's there, you can still solve it. It's not a problem if there's magic. Um, I'd mentioned the Knox's golden rules of detective writing, which is something that was used back in the golden age of mysteries. It's really fallen out of favor because some of the clues are very racist. I'm not even going to pretend otherwise; they really are. Um, but one of the big things it does bring up is not to have supernatural elements because for a long time those were used as a blanket excuse where it could be like, oh yeah, this happened because of magic, but you hadn't established magic properly in this world. You just hand waved it. And that's a problem. Victorian era stuff. One of the things that's nice about Victorian era is it takes away a lot of the stuff that makes mystery writing harder. Like I enjoy CSI sometimes, but it could be really hard to tell a mystery story when you have to constantly be thinking about DNA evidence and stuff like that. Because any tiny bit left behind can be a big problem. It's one of the reasons that it's kind of interesting watching mysteries set in places other than the United States, because gun violence is so much less. They come up with very different ways to kill people. It's one of the great things about Midsummer Murders. I've watched, I think that maybe not the entire show, but I've watched like 12 or 13 seasons of it, and it has. I feel like maybe 5% of the deaths in that are related to firearms, and it's actually really nice because there's so much variety you can have in what you do there as a result. But yeah, a lot of these rules are meant to be broken, but it is good to know about the formulas, so that can definitely make it helpful. What was the initial inspiration for Letters of the Devil? Like the setting and stuff. Funny thing about that, the inspiration was not mystery. It was old EC comics. I was reading a lot of shock suspense stories and kind of thought about that anthology format. And I wanted to do a. I had an idea for my own where the entire through line was that these people were receiving letters just addressed L that were giving away their deadliest secrets. And they were unconnected stories, although theoretically all in the same universe. And the writing just wasn't working. Um, so I was working on on that concept. Like, what am I going to do with this? And during that time, there were a few pieces of media that I went through that kind of changed how I was thinking about it. Most notably, the Count of Monte Cristo. I went through that and was like, if I think of things in terms of the Count of Monte Cristo, I could do an entire story that connects all of these, makes it work, and this guy's the one who did it. And that's how it ended up becoming more of a whodunit style. Oh, I also had played a whodunit game, Virtue's Last Reward, which is one of the Zero Escape games. By the way, for any gamers out there, the Zero Escape games are fantastic mysteries. Very good for checking out. I strongly like if there's a number two genre for me for mystery after comics, it's video games because video games are doing some amazing stuff right now. And I do strongly recommend checking those out. When it came to one of the things that was also fun after the first book is once I realized how that was going to work, I kind of knew what the next few books were going to be. I do have plans for future letters books. I'm taking a break because I need it. I've been doing this book for 2.5 years and I'm tired. I really need to play that. Yeah, if you're interested in mystery writing at all, I strongly recommend honestly all of Uchikoshi's games. I need to play AI the Somnium Files, which just came out, but I've heard it's fantastic for that. But yeah, actually, one thing that's kind of funny. I've been looking for some short stories to read. Any good tips for short mysteries? Uh, honestly, the Agatha Christie is honestly one of the best examples. You can find she did a lot of short work in addition, and even her long books aren't that long. And her stuff is some of the best mystery writing ever done. For other short work, I kind of recommend Sherlock Holmes, but Sherlock Holmes came out before the mystery format was really defined. They're more adventure stories than mysteries a lot of the time, but a lot of the formula ended up getting developed by people studying what he did. One of my favorite examples is The Speckled Band, which is a great short story, and it's one of the first real locked room mysteries. Um, but yeah, I tend to recommend the older stuff more than anything. Father Brown's not bad, although I recommend the show over the books, honestly. Um, but yeah, I need to think of other good short examples. Most of them tend to end up a little long because you want to get stuff. You want these to be a little bit complicated. That's how it all ends up. Like we had, you know what? I'll go ahead and bring it up again because why not? Which was it? It was you. Why does that keep freezing me? It's annoying. Yeah, thank you. All right, it's showing me as frozen, but I can fix that in a second. Nope, still frozen. Behave. Thank you. There we go. Yeah, always easier to work with this when this is up. And I will pop you back into sight. What were you saying about Zero Escape? My question interrupted you. No, we pretty much covered it. Oh, one thing with Zero Escape, I mentioned the golden rules for detective stuff. The second Zero Escape game, Virtue's Last Reward, deliberately broke every single one of those rules. So it's an interesting example. Maybe that's why manga mystery is so popular. Urasawa has 100,000 pages to set up a lead. Asador is so good at that. You don't even know the genres for the first 15 chapters. Yeah, the nice thing about how they format a lot of the mystery manga is the really, like, 20th Century Boys is an exception because that's a massive, massive story. But most of the mystery manga is contained at least within one book per story. It's one thing that's great about the Kindaichi case files. Each of those books is one mystery, and they're kind of standalone. Um, if you want shorter mystery stuff in manga form, honestly, one of the best is the Ace Attorney Investigations manga. You don't need to have played the games in order to appreciate that. It's one of the things that's kind of cool about it. It's very standalone. If you have played the games, it's all following Edgeworth doing like whodunit detective work. It's fantastic because I mean, it's just one of the best examples of it. But yeah, and it's a lot easier to find than the Kindaichi case files. You don't even know the genre for the first 15 chapters. What is Asadore? Is that a manga? I'm not familiar with that one. It's gonna have to go on the list, I guess. Uh, but if that is everything, by the way, if you want to take a screen capture of this and use it for yourself, go ahead. I'm actually not going to use this for a mystery. Feel free to use this. Part of the reason I'm doing this is so other people can learn how this stuff works, and you helped put this story together too. So this is yours to use. I'm going to leave it up on the screen. Feel free to take a screen capture, do whatever you need to do, and we will move forward with this. Oh, it's another Urasawa. Only Urasawa I've read is that and Monster. Um, is 20th Century Boys and Monster. Monster, I didn't get too deep into it, to be honest. I like the first volume as a standalone story more than anything. Oh, it's a new manga. That's why I haven't heard of it. Well, I'll need to check it out. Urasawa is one of the best storytellers in uh, manga. I absolutely love how his visual storytelling. It's like one of the big problems with a lot of manga. This is not universal, obviously, but a lot of manga has awful pacing and just really bad cuts between panels. It's so hard to follow. The same problem happens sometimes in American comics. You definitely see it there, but manga tends to have a real motion dynamic to it, and so it can be particularly jarring when it's done badly. Urasawa is one of the cleanest I've ever seen. Actually, another very clean one, and I have the book right here because I just recently got it and read through it. I referenced this in the talk earlier, but No Longer Human. So this is based on a. It's not a mystery, but I do want to shout it out because it was an incredible read. It's the original novel was by a guy named Osamu Dazai. He wrote this back in the 40s, I believe, and is recently adapted by horror manga legend Junji Ito, and it is incredible. Highly recommended. Very depressing, very heavy read, but I'd never really seen Junji Ito adapt other people's stuff until I read this, and I read his adaptation of Frankenstein. Also excellent. Um, but it's incredible work. Like he's in my opinion one of the best artists in manga, and definitely worth checking out. His horror stuff has some relation to mystery, but not quite there. But just general recommendation because he's fantastic. Um, Actually, funny thing about that, I started by doing a lot of horror comics. Horror and mystery are closely related. Um, you'll check that out. Fair warning, Rainer. Super depressing and a lot of sex. Just so you know. Like, fair warning. It's a dark book, but it's incredibly well written though. But yeah, mystery and horror are closely linked in a lot of ways. I like to think that horror is a mystery that hasn't been solved yet. And an example of that, I mentioned Sherlock Holmes. The Hound of the Baskervilles is a great example of both, because the first two chapters, if it ended at the end of the second chapter with the line, "It was the footprint of a gigantic hound," or I'm paraphrasing, that's a horror story. It's a classic horror story. It's great. The fact they continue the book and figure out what's going on, that made a mystery. Um, so I've always seen a close corollary. What was interesting to find is that mystery is way harder to write than horror, because you have to figure out like all of this, and you have to keep all these characters moving and keep it interesting and keep it dynamic, but they are closely related. Um, when you're putting together these lists for yourself, by the way, like we did this with random selection of people that were you'd find at a college campus, that can work great. But another trick is to think of it as just come up with a list of other things and assign each character as would be appropriate for those things. I'm wording that badly. An example from my first book is I used the seven deadly sins to figure out all the characters. I had one that I represented as sloth, one as lust, avarice, wrath, pride, envy, gluttony. Got to be a little impressed that I know all those. But it wasn't obvious. It wasn't like, oh, this person. We're not doing seven here. It's not obvious that each of these applies, but you know it, and that actually really helps to figure out have a nice spread of characters. I know someone who wrote an anthology comic where each was loosely based on earth, fire, air, and water, and they weren't explicitly doing that, but they had it in their mind and it helped organize everything. That can be really helpful. I've got one that uses signs of the zodiac that's on the back burner. I've got one that my second book used a couple of the major arcana, but not a lot of them, so it kind of cheated. But like that's another thing that can help when you're trying to come up with a list like this. All right. My throat is starting to get tired, and we pretty much covered the entire thing. Are there any final questions? I will duck into chat and watch that live. I actually can get updates on chat before it shows up on the stream because the stream is a little slow. Seven Deadly Sins are a classic for a reason. This is true. The Seven Deadly Sins, they do work for a lot of stuff. I was a little worried because you can really easily get cliche if you go too much in there. Great Talk will definitely be using this. All right, cool. I'll take that as confirmation that we are pretty much set. All right. As one last pitch, in case anyone is still watching who hasn't done this yet, my Kickstarter for my second mystery graphic novel, The Legacy of L, ends tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. That's in about 45 minutes. We are almost done. It has already made goal, but this is a good time to jump in and make sure that you can reserve a copy. This is a sequel to my first book, The Letters of the Devil. This one is following Melina Quinn, who is a criminology student at college, who's writing her thesis on the case from the first book. And things get a little bit complicated when a friend of hers commits suicide after receiving an email that appears to come from the series' antagonist, L. So Melina gets roped into investigating this and discovers that things go a lot darker than she realized they were going to. This book gets bigger, it gets crazier, and it opens up this whole world. I'm incredibly excited for it. If you do support the Kickstarter, you can get a PDF copy, a paperback copy, or a special edition copy, which comes with a handmade book sleeve and a ciphered letter from the antagonist. You also have the option of getting both books in case you didn't read the first one, and the top tier stuff also has 9x12 original ink and graphite illustrations in the style of the series. So if any of that interests you, the URL is at the bottom, www.lotd-comic.com. And barring that, I'll see you next time. Rock on, guys, and never stop drawing.